What would you do if a single word in your mother tongue cost you your job? It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon at Whitaker's Grill, the kind of upscale restaurant where the host wore a suit sharper than most people's resumes, and the lighting was dim enough to make overcooked steak seem elegant. Emily Chen had only been working there for 3 weeks. She had learned to smile through rude customers, memorize complicated wine lists, and never correct a guest, even if they pronounced foie gras like foie gras. But nothing in her training prepared her for what would happen that day. The incident started with something so small, it was almost unnoticeable. At table 7, an elderly woman sat alone, peering nervously at the menu through thick glasses. Her hands trembled as she tried to pronounce the names of dishes she clearly didn't recognize. Emily approached with her usual gentle tone. "Hi there, can I help you decide?" The woman looked up, and her face lit up with hesitant relief. In a soft, unsure voice, she asked in Mandarin, "Do you speak Chinese?" Without thinking, Emily responded with a smile. "I speak Chinese. I can help you." That small moment of connection, a kind exchange in a language they both understood, should have ended there. But it didn't. From across the room, James Whitaker had been walking the floor. The millionaire restaurateur himself, founder of the Whitaker Dining Group, known more for his brutal business instincts than his culinary finesse. He stopped cold. His blue eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. He walked straight toward Emily, cutting through the quiet hum of the dining room like a knife. The woman at table 7 looked confused as James leaned in with a tense, clipped voice. "Did you just speak another language at my restaurant?" he asked sharply. Emily blinked. "Yes, sir." The guest. "I don't care what the guest wanted. We don't allow non-English conversations here. It's unprofessional and confusing." Emily's face flushed. "I was just trying to help her. She didn't understand the menu." James didn't blink. "You're done here." There was a pause, as if the world around them had frozen. "You're firing me?" Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Insubordination. Pack your things." The elderly guest began to speak, alarmed, but James raised a hand to silence her. A few diners looked up, confused, their curiosity quickly turning to disapproval as they overheard the conversation. Emily, stunned and humiliated, walked away slowly, her apron clutched in one hand like a white flag. That moment was caught on a smartphone. A teenage server named Lisa, hidden behind the bar, had filmed the last 20 seconds. The clip hit TikTok an hour later, then Reddit, then YouTube, and by the next morning it was everywhere. Hashtag speak your truth. Hashtag justice for Emily. Hashtag boycott Whitakers. In the video, Emily looks composed, heartbroken but proud. She doesn't argue. She doesn't cry. She just walks away, dignity intact, as the millionaire boss towers behind her like a shadow from another century. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Within 24 hours, Emily became a reluctant symbol. News outlets ran the headline, "Waitress fired for speaking Chinese in upscale restaurant." Cable news panels debated workplace language policies. Podcasts called it a cultural reckoning in real time. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, eating leftover dumplings and trying to silence the buzz of her phone. Hundreds of messages poured in. Some from strangers telling her she was brave. Others from trolls saying she should speak English or go home. Home? She thought. This is my home. She kept replaying the moment in her head. Not out of regret, but disbelief. She had just tried to help someone. That's what her mother taught her. When people are lost, use whatever you have to help them find their way, even your words. James Whitaker, however, wasn't feeling so philosophical. His PR team was drowning. The video had cracked through his carefully polished brand like a wrecking ball through glass. Overnight, reservations had dropped 40%. Sponsors pulled out of a scheduled grand opening for his Miami location. "This will blow over," he told his assistant, grinding his jaw. "It won't," she said quietly, holding up her phone with the trending hashtags. "You made it personal." But it was personal. Not just for James. Not just for Emily. For every immigrant who's been told their language was less than. For every worker who stayed silent to keep a job. For every diner who sat at a table feeling invisible. This wasn't just about Chinese. It wasn't even just about language. It was about belonging. And James Whittaker had just declared, with full force and all the cameras watching, who didn't belong. Later that night, as rain tapped against the windows and New York shimmered under streetlights, Emily stood by her window, scrolling through messages. One stood out. It was from an anonymous sender. "You did nothing wrong. I saw what he did. I want to help you build something better." She stared at the screen. It wasn't much, but it was hope. Emily Chin sat on the edge of her bed, the city's cold night air creeping in through the cracked window, making her shiver. She clutched her phone tightly, scrolling through messages from strangers offering their support. The words were comforting, but they felt distant. She tried to find peace in the digital camaraderie, but her mind kept drifting back to her mother's kitchen, the smell of soy sauce and garlic, and the voice that had always guided her through every storm in life. Her mother, May, had raised her alone in a modest apartment on the edge of Chinatown. There was never much money, but there was always a quiet, unspoken pride in their lives. May worked long hours at a laundromat just a few blocks away, speaking to customers with a warmth that Emily had inherited. The work was backbreaking, but May never complained. She had immigrated from Guangdong, bringing with her nothing but a few old letters, a small suitcase, and the knowledge that in America, hard work meant survival. Emily's earliest memories were filled with the sound of Mandarin, the soft, melodic hum of her mother speaking to her in the language of their ancestors. May had never insisted that Emily speak Chinese, but it had always been a bridge between them, a bond that linked them to a heritage that was both distant and immediate. But as Emily grew older, the pressure of fitting in became heavier. At school, her classmates barely noticed her, except when they needed help with their math homework. And even then, it was only a passing glance, a quick thank you before they turned to the next person. She was just another quiet kid in the back of the class, another Asian face that blended in with the crowd. The most isolating part of her childhood, though, wasn't the language barrier, it was the feeling that she never truly belonged. At home, her mother's laughter was always in Mandarin, a language so beautifully familiar and yet so misunderstood by the world around them. At school, Emily was expected to speak perfect English, but it never came without the stares, the whispers about her accent, the quiet judgment that lingered in every interaction. The moment Emily turned 16, her mother sat her down at their small kitchen table, a table covered in a permanent layer of flour and soy sauce stains, evidence of the late-night meals May prepared after hours of grueling work. "Emily," her mother said gently, "you're growing up. You need to know something." May's voice cracked slightly, the years of sacrifice and the weight of unspoken worries hanging in the air. Emily, unsure of where the conversation was going, nodded quietly. "I know you want to fit in," May continued. "But never forget who you are. Never forget where you come from. Your language, your heritage, it's what makes you strong. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Those words stayed with Emily. It wasn't just a lesson in language. It was a lesson in identity, in pride, in the quiet power of being herself in a world that often felt like it demanded she be something else. Emily's first job was at a small family-owned diner in the heart of Chinatown. It was a humble place with faded red walls and tables that always seemed to wobble just a little. But it was where she learned everything she knew about service, about people, about how a smile could make a person's day. As the years went by, Emily juggled her job with night classes at a local community college, determined to get her degree, and one day, open a restaurant of her own. A place where people could connect over food, no matter where they came from. Her dream was simple, to create a space where culture wasn't just tolerated but celebrated, where food was a universal language, and where everyone, no matter their background, could find a seat at the table. But life had a way of complicating things. With each passing year, Emily's hours at the diner grew longer, her studies more intense, and her hopes more distant. She found herself working overtime just to make ends meet, her dreams of opening a restaurant slipping farther out of reach. She had taken the job at Whitaker's Grill with the hope that it would provide more stability, that maybe, just maybe, she could save enough to one day start that cafe. But the moment she stepped into Whitaker's polished, high-end world, it became clear that fitting in wasn't going to be as simple as serving food with a smile. The grill was a world of its own. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and a menu that could have been written in a different language altogether. But Emily kept her head down, learning the ropes, picking up the nuances of fine dining, and trying to blend into the background. She had to. She needed the paycheck. She needed to stay in the good graces of the millionaire owner, James Whitaker, who was known for his exacting standards. But now, as she sat on her bed, Emily felt that familiar, gnawing sense of displacement, the sense that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she adapted, she would always be seen as other. And it wasn't just by her customers. It was the world. A world that saw her language, her culture, her identity as something foreign. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from Lisa, the server who had filmed the incident. "I'm so sorry, Emily. You didn't deserve that. You're amazing. Keep going." Emily stared at the words for a long moment, a small tear slipping down her cheek. Lisa didn't know her struggle. She didn't know how hard it had been to stay true to herself in a world that seemed to want her to shrink, to blend in, to forget where she came from. But Lisa's message gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A reminder that she wasn't alone. She stood up, walked over to her window, and looked out at the city that never seemed to stop. The lights blinked in every direction, each one representing a story, a dream, a life. Maybe she didn't belong at Whitaker's Grill, but that didn't mean she didn't belong here. James Whitaker stood at the top of his penthouse, gazing out over the skyline of Manhattan. The city sprawled beneath him, a landscape of lights, concrete, and endless possibility. He had worked his entire life to get here, to stand at the top, to build something that would leave a legacy. But despite his success, James couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that gnawed at him. There was a coldness in his chest, a void that had been there as long as he could remember. The city that he had conquered seemed so small from up here. He was a giant in a world of his own making, but as the night stretched on, that giant felt more like a man who was constantly running from something. James had always known that life was a game. And in this game, the rules were simple. You win or you lose. There was no in-between. Born in a small town outside of Boston, James had always been an outsider. His father, a man who had spent most of his life chasing quick fixes, had abandoned the family when James was just 7 years old. His mother, a schoolteacher, had been kind but distant. She tried her best to make ends meet, but James always knew they were barely scraping by. They lived in a modest, aging house with peeling paint and a driveway full of potholes. But James was determined to escape that life. He wanted more money, more power, more respect. He knew that the key to survival in this world was to build an empire, and he had always been good at finding opportunities. At 18, after high school, James moved to New York with nothing but a suitcase and an unrelenting drive. He enrolled at a local college, studying business, and worked part-time jobs to cover tuition. His mother, though she was proud of him, never quite understood why he had to leave. Their relationship had always been strained. She wanted him to be grounded, to understand the value of family and community, But James had different ideas. He wanted more than just a comfortable life. He wanted to be someone who mattered. Over the years, James built his restaurant empire. It wasn't easy. He had to fight for every inch of ground to prove himself in an industry that was as cutthroat as they came. His first restaurant, Whitaker's Grill, had been a gamble. But with his charm, his razor-sharp instincts, and his ability to read people, he turned it into a success. But success didn't come without sacrifices. James had learned early on that if you wanted to survive in this world, you had to push others aside. You couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way. It was about power, control, and making sure that no one could ever take what was yours. And that's what he did. He pushed away anyone who might have gotten too close, anyone who might have seen the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The truth was, James Whitaker had never really known love, at least, not the kind that made you feel like you mattered. His ex-wife, Claire, had tried to make him see that, but he'd driven her away, just like he had everyone else. As he built his empire, he also built walls that kept people out, that kept emotions at bay. But there was one thing James couldn't escape, the feeling of being different, of never fully belonging. His father had abandoned him because he was weak, his mother had never understood his hunger for success, and he had always felt like an outsider in the world he'd worked so hard to create. He thought about his own heritage. His mother was Italian, and his father was a mix of several European backgrounds. He spoke English fluently, of course, but he never truly felt comfortable in the world of his father's heritage, always the outsider in that world, too. For years, he told himself that it didn't matter, that the past didn't matter, that what mattered was the present and the future. And yet, every time he walked into one of his restaurants, every time he saw the diversity of his staff and customers, he felt that gnawing feeling again, that he wasn't truly a part of any of it. He wasn't a part of the culture of success he had built. He was merely a cog in the machine. That gnawing feeling, that deep sense of discomfort, became more pronounced after his failed marriage. He buried himself in his work, convinced that if he kept moving, if he kept conquering, he could outrun the loneliness that threatened to swallow him whole. Then, Emily Chin came along. The incident at Whitaker's Grill, the way she had spoken Chinese to an elderly woman, the way she had dared to be herself in his restaurant, struck something deep inside him. At first, he didn't know why it bothered him so much. It wasn't the language itself, he told himself. It was the fact that it was a reminder of everything he had distanced himself from. James had always been the kind of person who expected others to assimilate into his world. He had done it himself, pushed himself past his humble beginnings and into the world of power and wealth. He had never had the luxury of embracing his heritage the way others did. So when Emily had spoken her native language in his restaurant, it had felt like a challenge to the very foundations of the world he had built. But the more he thought about it, the more something about the situation gnawed at him. Was it really so wrong for Emily to speak her truth? Was it really so wrong for someone to embrace their culture, their language, their identity? As the days passed and his business began to suffer, James found himself reflecting on his own upbringing. He thought about his mother's quiet love, about the way she used to tell him stories in Italian when he was younger. He hadn't understood then, but now, as an adult, he wished he could go back and listen, really listen. Maybe it would have helped him understand himself better. But it was too late now. He couldn't undo the years of pushing people away, of pretending to be someone he wasn't. And now he had made a mistake, a big one. The city felt different the morning after Emily's dismissal from Whitaker's Grill. The air was thick with tension, as if the entire neighborhood could feel the ripples from the incident that had shaken up the local dining scene. Emily stood at the bus stop outside her apartment building, her phone still buzzing from all the messages she had received over the past 12 hours. But instead of feeling validation, the texts only added to her frustration. Some offered condolences, others demanded answers. She had made the decision not to respond to any of them. The last thing she wanted was to give a platform to the people who, a day ago, hadn't given her a second glance. As she scrolled through the social media frenzy, her stomach twisted. Whitaker's Grill had posted a public statement regarding the firing, justifying it as a decision made in the interest of maintaining a cohesive, professional environment. The words felt hollow, like the company had made a calculated move to distance itself from any further conflict. But Emily could see the truth hidden between the lines. Her speaking Mandarin was something they couldn't tolerate, something that had made their glossy restaurant world uncomfortable. It wasn't just the public statement that stung. It was the comments, the reactions, the countless people weighing in with their opinions, many of which mocked Emily's culture, her identity, or worse, the way she had disrespected the environment with something so foreign. Should have known better than to hire someone who couldn't speak proper English. I guess that's what happens when you're in the hospitality industry now, one user commented. Another added, if she was that upset, she should have just quit. No reason to make a scene. She's just bitter because she'll never be a part of the elite circle. Let her go work in a Chinese restaurant where she belongs. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she read through them. She knew there would be backlash, it was inevitable. But the venom in the words, the casual cruelty, took her by surprise. It felt like an attack on everything that she was, her family, her language, her upbringing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lisa, the coworker who had filmed the incident and posted it online. Emily hesitated before opening the message. I'm so sorry, Emily. I had no idea it would blow up like this. The press is all over it now. People are calling you a hero, but I know it's been hard on you. Emily sighed. Hero? She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exposed, like a raw nerve. No one seemed to care about her side of the story, just the drama, the spectacle, the outrage. All she wanted now was to be left alone, to escape from the scrutiny, from the overwhelming pressure that came with being thrust into the public eye. Yet, despite the backlash, something else was happening too. Support was pouring in from people she'd never met, from communities she didn't even know existed. Posts on social media under the hashtag #StandWithEmily flooded in from strangers all over the world, people sharing their own stories of feeling marginalized, of being silenced for speaking their truth. #StandWithEmily, one tweet read. She had every right to speak her language. If James Whitaker can't handle diversity, maybe he's the one who needs to leave. #cultural respect. Another post read, I've been where Emily is. It's tough when people who claim to be inclusive actually don't want anything to do with your culture. Emily deserves so much better. #no to racism. By the afternoon, the hashtag was trending. The growing public outcry caught the attention of local media outlets. News stories popped up, each one focusing on the discrimination Emily had faced. Several journalists reached out for interviews, eager to hear her side of the story. But Emily was silent, choosing to avoid the cameras, avoiding the spotlight that had suddenly been cast on her. It was a whirlwind, and she wasn't sure how to navigate it. Meanwhile, James Whitaker sat at his desk in his office, the same office that overlooked the bustling streets of Manhattan. He hadn't left it since the news of the firing broke. His secretary, Claire, had brought him countless updates on the fallout, but nothing she said seemed to penetrate his cold exterior. He was too busy trying to maintain control of the damage, too focused on salvaging his brand's reputation. Mr. Whitaker, Claire said softly, her voice tense, there's a lot of negative press. The social media backlash is growing by the hour. The board is starting to get nervous. James waved her off, his hand hovering over his coffee cup, but he couldn't bring himself to take a sip. I don't care about social media, he muttered, staring out at the skyline. I care about running a business. But he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling inside him. The more he saw Emily's face plastered on screens, the more he felt a twinge of guilt. He couldn't explain it, but the image of her, standing there, defiant, unapologetic, speaking her native language with pride, had stuck with him. For the first time in a long while, James felt something he wasn't used to: uncertainty. He turned to Claire. "Get me the video. I want to see it." She hesitated, but then nodded. A few moments later, she returned with her tablet, the video already queued up. James watched the footage. Emily, the young woman who had been fired, was speaking to an elderly Chinese woman in the restaurant. Her face was calm, her voice warm, as if she were simply trying to make a connection, to ensure the woman felt comfortable. And then, the moment he had become so fixated on, the point where he had snapped, Emily had turned to another table, her voice still in Chinese, before the manager had intervened, causing the scene that led to her firing. He couldn't stop watching. He saw it differently now, saw the warmth in Emily's eyes, the kindness in her voice, the way she was simply trying to be herself in an environment that had made it clear that she wasn't welcome unless she conformed. James leaned back in his chair, his fingers running through his hair. It was too late to take it all back, but the damage had been done. The restaurant's reputation was in jeopardy, and Emily's dignity had been shattered. He couldn't help but wonder if he'd been wrong all along. The morning after the video went viral, James Whittaker woke up to the kind of day that he had feared for years. The kind of day that a successful businessman, no matter how many zeros were in his bank account, could never plan for, never anticipate. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from his board members, reporters, and even a few people who claimed to be his friends. The ones who were supposed to understand him, who were supposed to be loyal no matter the storm. But they weren't. No one was. James didn't know if it was the shock of the backlash or the heavy weight of regret pressing down on him, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt truly alone. He wasn't sure what to do, how to fix the situation he'd created. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he stared blankly at the phone in his hand, the weight of his actions swirling around him like a storm that wouldn't pass. Every message, every notification, was a reminder of the mistake he had made, firing Emily, a woman who had simply been herself in a world that didn't value her for who she was. He had been so blinded by his own prejudices, so consumed by the desire to control everything around him, that he hadn't seen her humanity. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. He had tried to justify it in his mind, telling himself that he was doing what was best for his business. The employees needed to follow the rules. The customers needed to feel comfortable in a space that had been curated to perfection. But now, in the quiet of his penthouse, he realized how hollow those justifications were. It was never about business. It had always been about fear. Fear of change. Fear of something different, something that challenged the order he had spent years building. What scared him the most was how easy it had been to make that decision. To fire Emily without a second thought, without considering how her presence in his restaurant had brought a warmth and authenticity that he had never truly allowed into his world. He had made a snap judgment based on his own biases, thinking that the professional environment of Whittaker's Grill would somehow be tainted by something as simple as a language that wasn't even his own. Emily's video had become a symbol of something larger than the incident itself. People were rallying around her, using the hashtag #StandWithEmily, and her face was everywhere. In the media, on every social platform. They didn't just see her as a waitress anymore. They saw her as a representative of a cultural battle, of the fight for identity and acceptance. The more James thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. It wasn't just that Emily had spoken Chinese. It was that she had dared to do so in a space that had never welcomed anyone who wasn't already a part of its elite world. A world that he had built for himself, but one that now seemed empty, shallow, and out of touch with the very people he was trying to serve. Emily was just the catalyst for something much larger. She had made him confront the realities of his own life, The way he had built his empire on the backs of others without ever truly seeing them as human beings. The way he had sacrificed everything, his personal life, his family, his connections, to get ahead, to stay at the top. And now, standing at the peak, all he could see was how isolated he truly was. There was no one left to share this moment with. His ex-wife, Claire, had long since left him, tired of his ambition that had consumed him. His employees respected him out of fear, not admiration. The friends he had surrounded himself with were nothing but figures in a distant circle, offering pleasantries, but never genuine connection. James stood up abruptly, pacing the room, the weight of the realization settling on his chest like an elephant. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could make it right. Or at least try. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from his lawyer, Jeffrey. James, Jeffrey's voice was low and measured. I think you need to address this situation publicly. If you don't take control of the narrative soon, it's going to get much worse. The press is only getting more aggressive. James pinched the bridge of his nose, frustration mounting. He didn't want to address it. He didn't want to give in to the pressure, to apologize in a way that felt insincere. But deep down, he knew Jeffrey was right. The longer he waited, the more damage would be done not just to his reputation, but to the business he had spent years building. I'll handle it, James muttered. Just tell the board I'm taking care of it. All right, but remember, whatever you decide, you need to act fast. It's not just about the restaurant anymore, it's about your image. This could cost you everything if you don't make the right move. James hung up the phone and stared out the window at the skyline again. What was the right move? He'd spent so much time building his empire, so much time making decisions based on cold logic and reason, that he had forgotten what it meant to be human. He had let ambition cloud his judgment, had let success define him. But now, he realized that all the money in the world couldn't fix what he had broken inside. The door to his office opened, and Claire stepped in, holding a cup of coffee. She didn't speak immediately, simply placing it down on the desk in front of him. James, she said after a beat, her voice softer now. I know you don't want to admit it, but you need to face this. You need to take responsibility for what happened. James looked up at her, his eyes tired. He could see the concern in her gaze, the quiet disappointment that she had never quite let go of. I know, he whispered, the words heavy on his tongue. I know I messed up. Claire nodded, sitting across from him. The only way you'll make this right is by doing what's right, not what's easy. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the walls of his office. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly unsure of himself. But he knew one thing for certain. He had to make it right. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? James Whittaker stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like 1,000 tons. His reflection stared back at him, and for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking at him. The once confident, unshakable millionaire who had prided himself on his ability to make tough decisions now looked uncertain, vulnerable. The edges of his neatly pressed suit felt too tight around his chest. He could feel his heart pounding in his throat as he practiced the words he was about to say, words he knew couldn't undo the damage he had done, but words that, at the very least, could be a start. He had spent the past few days drafting and redrafting a public statement, working with his team to carefully craft the perfect apology. But no matter how many times he read it, it never felt right. The words always seemed empty, insufficient in the face of the hurt he had caused. The pressure was immense. The media, the public, his employees, they were all waiting for him to make his move. Every second he delayed, the storm around him grew more intense. The hashtag #StandWithEmily was still trending, and people were beginning to question the true values of Whittaker's Grill. His silence had only fueled the fire. Now he had to step up. James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, then picked up his phone and dialed his PR team. "Let's do it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm ready." Emily sat on the worn couch in her small apartment, her phone pressed to her ear as she listened to Lisa, her former coworker, talk about the latest developments. The days following her firing had been a whirlwind. One minute, she was a waitress at Whitaker's Grill, just trying to make a living. The next, she was the face of a cultural firestorm. "Have you seen it?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with excitement. "James Whitaker just posted a video. He's apologizing for what happened, saying he was wrong." Emily's heart skipped a beat. James Whitaker, the man who had fired her, humiliated her in front of the entire restaurant, and then brushed her off like she was nothing, was apologizing? "What's he saying?" Emily asked, her voice flat with disbelief. "He's saying he made a mistake. That he was wrong to fire you, that he didn't understand the importance of cultural diversity and respect. He says he didn't realize how much harm he caused, and he wants to make things right. He even said he's going to speak with you personally." Emily wasn't sure how to react. She had spent the last few days processing the emotions that had come with losing her job, with the feeling of being dehumanized because of something as simple as the language she spoke. The apology should have made her feel vindicated. It should have been a moment of triumph. But all she could feel was a tight knot in her chest. "He's just trying to save his business," she muttered. "It's all about damage control." "I get it," Lisa said, her voice softening. "But maybe this is a chance for you to show people who he really is. To hold him accountable." Emily didn't respond right away. She knew the right thing to do, what everyone expected of her, to forgive, to move forward, to embrace the apology. But forgiveness wasn't something she could offer easily, not when the scar from what had happened was still so fresh. Not when she had been forced to relive the humiliation over and over in the media. "Thanks, Lisa," Emily said, her voice strained. "I'll think about it." After hanging up, Emily sat in the silence of her apartment, her mind racing. Was this apology genuine? Did James Whitaker truly understand the impact of his actions, or was this just another attempt to protect his brand? Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her mother. "I saw the video, Emily. You are so strong. Whatever you decide to do next, know that we are proud of you." Her mother's words brought tears to her eyes. The simple affirmation was all she needed to realize that she wasn't alone in this fight. She had a family who supported her, a community that stood with her. Maybe it was time to stop fighting alone, to allow herself to trust that things could change. As much as she wanted to ignore it, James' apology meant something. It was a sign that he was at least trying to make amends. But what did it mean for her? Was this the moment where she could turn the page, where she could find some peace, or was she still fighting a battle that would only leave her exhausted and defeated? She didn't know yet. But she knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. James sat in the conference room at Whitaker's Grill, the camera rolling, the lights shining down on him. His PR team was seated nearby, watching him intently, waiting for him to speak. He had been in countless meetings over the years, had made speeches in front of boards of directors, investors, and clients, but this moment felt different. This wasn't about profits. This wasn't about the future of his restaurant empire. This was personal. He cleared his throat, trying to steady the nerves that threatened to break through. He could feel his palms sweating as he glanced at the camera. He had always been in control, always had the answers. But today, he was the one who had to admit that he had been wrong. "Hello," he began, his voice low but steady. "I'm James Whitaker, the owner of Whitaker's Grill. And today, I'm here to speak about something that I deeply regret." He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "Recently, an incident occurred at one of our locations that has left a lot of people feeling hurt, disrespected, and upset. And I want to be clear, I am one of those people. I was wrong. The decision I made to fire Emily was wrong. And I am sorry. James' voice cracked slightly as he continued. I failed to understand what I should have understood a long time ago, that diversity, culture, and respect are not just buzzwords, they are the foundation of who we are as a society. Emily was simply doing her job, and I let my own ignorance and fear of change cloud my judgment. I hurt her, and I hurt all the people who supported her, who saw themselves in her, and who believed that we should all be able to speak freely, to be ourselves, no matter where we come from. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes intense with sincerity. I will be reaching out to Emily personally, and I will do everything I can to make this right. I have learned a hard lesson, and I will work every day to be better. For Emily, for our community, for all of you. He paused, the weight of his words sinking in. This isn't just an apology. This is a commitment. A commitment to do better, to be better, and to never forget that it's not about how we make money, it's about how we make people feel. He took a deep breath before finishing. I am truly sorry, and I will prove it. The camera stopped recording. James didn't move. He sat still for a moment, letting the silence of the room engulf him. There was no applause, no standing ovation. But there was a feeling of something much more significant, something that had been missing for far too long. James had never imagined that a simple conversation could feel like such a monumental event. The air in his office was thick with tension as he waited for Emily to arrive. The room, usually filled with the hum of business deals and negotiations, now felt oddly quiet, like a stage set for something that could change everything. He had done the best he could to prepare for this moment. He had practiced his apology, spoken to his team, and tried to convince himself that his words were sincere. But nothing could have prepared him for the real thing. The real moment where he would face the person he had wronged and try to make amends. The door opened softly, and Emily stepped in, looking calm but guarded. She was dressed simply, in a casual sweater and jeans, but there was an unmistakable presence about her. James immediately felt the weight of her gaze, steady and unyielding. She wasn't here to appease him. She wasn't here for his apology because he needed it. She was here because she deserved to be treated with respect, and whatever came next, it would be on her terms. James stood up and extended his hand. Emily, thank you for coming. Emily glanced at his hand for a moment before shaking it, her grip firm but not warm. Let's get this over with. Her bluntness hit James like a jolt, reminding him that this wasn't going to be easy. There would be no quick fixes, no magic words to erase what had happened. But that was something he had to accept. The damage was done, and it would take time to rebuild if she was willing to let him. Please sit down, James offered, gesturing to the chair across from him. Emily sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving his. She was calm, but James could feel the quiet strength that radiated from her. She wasn't intimidated by him. And in that moment, he realized that for all his wealth, his status, his power, he had never truly been in control. Not now, not in this conversation. This was something different. This was real. James took a deep breath, trying to find the words that would mean something more than just an apology. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I'll be honest, when I first saw the video, my immediate reaction wasn't one of understanding. It was anger, fear. I didn't understand why you spoke Chinese. I didn't understand why it mattered. And I made the mistake of thinking that the way I've built things, my business, my world, was the only way. And that's not true. It's a narrow view, and I can see that now. Emily didn't respond right away. Her eyes were fixed on him, but there was no judgment in her gaze, just an unreadable calm. She was letting him speak, and for a moment, James wondered if she would say anything at all. I hurt you, he continued, his voice steady but filled with remorse. I know that firing you was wrong, and I know that I can't undo the pain I caused you. But I want to make things right. Not because I'm trying to save my business, but because I genuinely want to be a better person. Emily's lips twitched slightly, as if she were on the edge of saying something, but she held herself back. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "You don't get to undo the hurt just by saying you're sorry, James," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What happened, what you did, affected me. It affected my livelihood, my dignity. And you don't get to fix that in one conversation or with a couple of words." James swallowed, his throat tight. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't expecting forgiveness, not immediately. But he had to try. "I know. And I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can learn, that I can grow. I want to make it right, even if that means it takes time." Emily leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "And what do you think that looks like, James? How exactly do you plan to make it right?" Her question hit him like a slap. It was one thing to apologize, to say the words. But to live up to those words? That was something else entirely. "I want to offer you your job back," he said, his voice unwavering. "But I know that's not enough. I want to support you, whatever that means. Whether it's helping you with other opportunities, or even just being an advocate for you in any way I can. I know it won't fix everything, but I want to prove to you that I'm capable of change." Emily didn't respond immediately. She simply sat there, considering his words. James could feel the tension building again, thickening the air between them. He had no idea what she would say next. He had no idea if she would even believe him. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now, but no less determined. "I've thought a lot about this, James. About the apology, about the video, about everything. And you're right. Saying sorry doesn't make things better. You can't just say it and expect everything to go back to normal. But there's something I will give you. I'll give you the chance to prove that you changed. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, for everyone who's been told they don't belong, or that who they are isn't enough." James felt a surge of hope. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even forgiveness. But it was a door opening, just a crack. And that was more than he had expected. "I don't expect everything to be fixed in one conversation, Emily, but I'll prove to you, step by step, that I'm serious about this. About making it right." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes still hard but thoughtful. "We'll see." The tension in the room was still palpable, but it had shifted somehow. There was still a long way to go, but this was the first step. A fragile, tentative first step. And for the first time in days, James felt something other than guilt and shame. He felt a glimmer of hope. As Emily stood up to leave, James stood with her. She paused at the door and turned back to him, her eyes meeting his one last time. "Thank you for your apology," she said simply, before walking out of the room. James stood still, his heart racing. There was no resolution yet, no clean ending to this story. But he had made a choice. He had made the first step toward redemption, and that was something he had never thought he'd have the chance to do. James had never been one to back down from a challenge. In his years of building Whitaker's Grill into a well-known name in the restaurant industry, he had faced countless obstacles, competition, economic downturns, and even public relations disasters. But nothing had prepared him for the challenge that lay ahead, earning back the trust of Emily and proving to himself that he could live up to the promise he had made. Every morning since that first meeting, James had woken up with a renewed sense of purpose. He had thought he understood the importance of business, of success. But now, with everything that had happened, he realized that real success didn't lie in profits or headlines. It lay in the relationships you built, the respect you gave to others, and the integrity with which you lived your life. The first step on his path of redemption had been to offer Emily her job back, but he knew that wasn't nearly enough. He needed to show her that his apology was more than just words, that he was ready to make a meaningful change. So, he started small. He called his team together the following week. It wasn't unusual for James to host meetings, but this time, the conversation would be different. The room was full of the usual faces, the managers, the head chefs, the marketing team, but for the first time in a long time, there was a palpable sense of unease in the air. James had told them what happened with Emily, but now he had to show them that he meant it when he said he wanted change. "Listen up," James began, standing at the head of the table. "What happened at Whitaker's Grill with Emily was unacceptable. I let my own ignorance and biases dictate a decision that hurt not only her, but all of you. I failed to uphold the values we claim to represent here: respect, inclusivity, and integrity. That stops today." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each person present. There were no harsh words, no arguments, just quiet acknowledgement. They could see it in his face. This wasn't a PR stunt. This was real. "I want to make this right," James continued. "We're going to start by offering a diversity and inclusion training for every member of this team. We'll be bringing in experts who can help us understand the importance of cultural awareness. It's time we walk the talk. From now on, our mission is to ensure that everyone, regardless of background or language, feels welcomed and valued here." There was a brief silence. Then one of the managers, Sandra, spoke up. "I know it's going to take more than training to change the culture here, James. It's going to take time, and it's going to take more than just a few hours of lectures. But if you're serious about this, I think we can make a difference." James nodded. "I'm serious. And we're going to do this right." The meeting wrapped up, and James left the room with a sense of accomplishment, but it wasn't enough. This was just the beginning. He knew that he had a lot of work ahead of him, not only with his team, but also with Emily. The road to redemption would require more than just words. It would require actions, and those actions had to come in the form of real change. Meanwhile, Emily was still processing everything that had happened in the past week. She had felt conflicted after her conversation with James. Part of her wanted to walk away and never look back. But another part, one she wasn't entirely ready to admit, felt a flicker of hope. Was he sincere? Was this apology more than just a business move? Her phone buzzed as she sat in her small apartment, sorting through the messages from her family and friends. They were supportive, of course, but each message felt more like a reminder of how much her life had changed since the incident. A new notification caught her attention. It was from Whitaker's Grill. "We're starting a new initiative to foster cultural inclusivity and respect within our team. We've implemented new diversity training and are actively working to create a better environment for everyone. Stay tuned for more updates." Emily stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over the screen. It was clear that James was trying to make amends, but was it enough? Could she ever go back to working at a place that had humiliated her so publicly, or was this just another hollow attempt at damage control? She couldn't decide. Not yet. But one thing was certain: she was watching closely. And if he really was committed to change, she'd see it. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't going to give him a free pass, but for the first time since everything had unfolded, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. 2 weeks later, James reached out to Emily again. This time, he wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking her to come back to the restaurant. He was simply extending an invitation. "Emily," the email read, "I know you're not ready to come back to Whitaker's Grill, and I understand. But I would like to invite you to a private event we're hosting next week. It's a celebration of the changes we're making at the restaurant, and I'd be honored if you would join us. There will be no expectations, just an opportunity to see for yourself how we're moving forward." James waited nervously as he clicked send, knowing that it was entirely up to Emily whether she would take him up on the invitation. He didn't expect her to come, not after everything. But he hoped, deep down, that she would. He hoped that seeing the changes with her own eyes might help her find some peace, and maybe, just maybe, help him prove to her that he wasn't the same man who had fired her so carelessly. The night of the event, Emily stood outside the restaurant, staring at the glowing lights and the neatly arranged tables. The air was crisp, and the sounds of laughter and conversation floated from inside. She had hesitated for days, wondering if attending this event would just be a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. but something inside her told her that she needed to see it for herself. She had been invited to the restaurant's new beginning, and she wasn't about to let the opportunity pass her by without witnessing it firsthand. As she pushed open the door and stepped inside, she felt a mix of emotions: skepticism, curiosity, and a small glimmer of hope. James was standing near the front, greeting guests and speaking with the team. When he saw her, his expression softened. He didn't approach her immediately, he knew better than to push, but his eyes lingered on her, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. Emily scanned the room, taking it all in. There were posters hanging on the walls, showcasing the diverse backgrounds of the staff and the community. The diversity training had clearly begun to take root, and she noticed that people from different backgrounds were mingling more openly than she had ever seen. For the first time, the restaurant felt like a place of genuine inclusivity. As she walked around the room, her mind raced. Was this enough? Could she ever forgive him for what had happened? She didn't know. But tonight, she was willing to see the first step. The weeks had passed since Emily attended the event at Whitaker's Grill, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't quite as simple as they appeared. James had made progress. Yes, he had taken genuine steps toward change. But that didn't erase the pain she had felt when he had fired her, nor did it wipe away the embarrassment, the uncertainty, and the fear that had followed. Emily had given him the opportunity to show her that he was committed to making things right, and while she could see that he was trying, she still wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive him. The walls she had built around herself were strong. Her life had moved forward in ways she hadn't expected, and she wasn't sure how James could fit back into it, even if he was a changed man. One Thursday afternoon, Emily sat in her apartment, scrolling through job listings on her laptop. She had found another job as a server at a nearby cafe, one with a much smaller team and a more relaxed atmosphere. It wasn't the glamorous world of high-end restaurants, but it was a place where she felt valued, where she could just be herself. She had made peace with the idea that maybe she didn't need to be part of the world that had hurt her so much. Just as she was about to close the laptop, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Emily, this is James Whitaker. I know it's been a while and I don't expect a response, but I wanted to ask if we could meet again. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I think it's time for us to talk. I understand if you're not ready, but if you are, I'll be waiting." She stared at the screen for a long moment. His words were sincere, she could feel it. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for another conversation with him. She had come so far in rebuilding her own life, and she feared that stepping back into the world of Whitaker's Grill might undo some of the healing she had worked so hard to achieve. But then, unexpectedly, she found herself typing out a response. "I'll meet you tomorrow at 3 p.m. But I'm not making any promises." The text sent, and Emily immediately felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. What was she doing? Why was she even agreeing to this? But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about James anymore. It was about her, too. It was about confronting the past, about healing the wounds that had been left open for far too long. The next day, Emily arrived at a quiet cafe on the corner of Main Street. It wasn't far from her apartment, and the atmosphere was calm. Just the kind of place she could have a serious conversation without distractions. She had arrived early, giving her some time to gather her thoughts. She wasn't sure what this conversation would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: it was time to stop running from the past. A few minutes later, James walked in. His usual polished, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a man who seemed almost uncertain, even vulnerable. He was dressed casually in jeans and a button-up shirt, his hair slightly tousled. He spotted Emily immediately and made his way to the table, sitting across from her. "Thanks for agreeing to meet with me," he said, his voice quiet. "I know it's been a while and I know I can't erase what happened, but I've been thinking a lot about the way I treated you." Emily nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on the rim of her coffee cup. She wasn't going to rush into this conversation. Not anymore. You've made a lot of changes, James. I've seen that. But I still don't know if it's enough. You hurt me. You took away my livelihood, my sense of security. You made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I didn't belong. James' face tightened at her words, but he didn't interrupt. He had heard it all before. He knew what he had done. It was something he would have to live with forever. I know, he said quietly. I can't undo the damage I caused. I know that. And I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be a better person, a better boss, a better human. Emily looked at him closely, trying to gauge whether he truly understood what he had done. She had always been good at reading people, but James had never been easy to read. He had always been confident, sometimes to the point of arrogance. But now, he was different. His eyes were softer, less guarded. He seemed less like the man who had fired her on a whim and more like someone who was genuinely trying to learn. I can see that you've made changes, she said slowly. And I can see that you're trying. But that doesn't mean I have to just forget what happened. James nodded. I don't expect you to forget. I wouldn't ask you to. I know I have a lot to prove to you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just want the chance to prove that I'm not the same person I was before. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the same man who had fired her so callously. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. But she was willing to give him a chance to show her that he had truly changed. I'm not going to lie to you, James, she said after a long pause. I still don't know if I can forgive you. But I will say this. I'm willing to see where this goes. I'm willing to watch and listen, and if you prove that you've really changed, maybe we can start to move forward. A sigh of relief escaped James. He wasn't asking for forgiveness yet, and he wasn't expecting a clean slate, but this was a step forward. A real step. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't expect anything from you, but I appreciate you giving me the chance. I won't let you down. Emily gave a small nod, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer. She wasn't sure what the future held, and she wasn't about to make any promises. But in this moment, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The days following their conversation at the cafe had been filled with quiet reflection for both Emily and James. Neither of them had expected a quick resolution, and both knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But there was a sense of progress, however small, that they both could feel. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel the constant weight of anger and betrayal. She was no longer bound by the past, but she wasn't ready to completely embrace James' offer of reconciliation either. Trust, after all, was not something easily rebuilt. James, on the other hand, found himself waking up each day with a renewed sense of purpose. He had worked hard to build Whitaker's Grill into a successful brand, but now he understood that true success lay in creating a culture of respect, fairness, and inclusivity. It wasn't just about what was on the menu or how many awards they could rack up, it was about the people who made the restaurant what it was. And Emily, despite the rift between them, had shown him what it meant to truly listen, to recognize where he had gone wrong, and to make things right. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued working at the cafe, but she found herself thinking more and more about Whitaker's Grill. She still wasn't sure if she could return, but the changes James had implemented were starting to stick. She had heard from several of the staff members about the ongoing diversity training, about the new initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity, and about how the entire team seemed more open and united than it had been before. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, as Emily closed up at the cafe, she received another message from James. This time, it wasn't a request to meet. It was an invitation to an event he was hosting at the restaurant. Emily, I wanted to invite you to a special dinner we're hosting at Whitaker's Grill next Friday. It's a thank you to all our loyal customers and staff, and it would mean a lot to me if you could join us. I know it's a big ask, but I wanted to personally invite you. I'd love the chance to talk more if you're open to it." She stared at the screen for a moment, the familiar rush of anxiety and uncertainty creeping in. Was this another attempt to win her back, or was he truly trying to show her that he had changed? But Emily had learned a lot about herself over the past few weeks. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first walked away from Whitaker's Grill. She had come a long way, not just in terms of her career, but in how she viewed herself, how she handled conflict, and how she navigated her relationships. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they told her that this was an invitation worth considering. She typed out a response. "I'll come, but just as an observer. No promises." When she hit send, she immediately felt the weight of the decision. She had agreed to show up, but she wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know if she was ready to walk back into Whitaker's Grill, to see the place where everything had gone wrong. But she was willing to take that first step. The night of the event arrived, and Emily found herself standing outside the familiar glass doors of Whitaker's Grill. The warm glow of the lights inside felt both inviting and intimidating, reminding her of the time she had spent there, the moments that had shaped the person she was today. She took a deep breath, adjusting the straps of her dress, and walked inside. The atmosphere was entirely different from the cold, judgmental environment she had left behind. The room was filled with laughter, casual chatter, and the soft clinking of glasses. It felt warm, comfortable, even a little cozy. People were mingling, staff members were laughing, and for the first time, Emily didn't feel like an outsider. James spotted her almost immediately, his face lighting up when he saw her. He walked over, his hands slightly trembling as he extended a greeting. "Emily, I'm so glad you came," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "It means a lot to me, more than you know." She gave him a tight smile. "I'm just here to observe. Let's leave it at that." James nodded, not pushing, not trying to change her mind. He respected her boundaries. "Of course. I understand. But I hope tonight you can see how much things have changed. I hope you can see the team, see the culture we're trying to build." Emily scanned the room. It was clear that the changes James had spoken of were real. The staff, from the kitchen to the front of the house, seemed genuinely at ease with each other. They spoke to one another with kindness and respect. There was an atmosphere of unity, of understanding that she hadn't seen before. The walls between the staff members and customers had started to break down, and it was apparent that there was a collective desire to make the restaurant a place of inclusivity. She wandered around for a while, taking it all in. She saw Sandra, the manager who had spoken so earnestly at the meeting months ago, chatting with a group of guests about the restaurant's new initiatives. She noticed the chef, Tony, who had once been so distant and cold, laughing with a customer about a new dish. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear that the atmosphere had shifted. The changes were starting to stick. When Emily had wandered through the room a little more, James approached her again, this time holding a glass of wine. "I want to thank you," he said softly. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for the chance to show you that I'm trying. That we're all trying. We're a work in progress, but we're better than we were." Emily met his gaze, her heart a little lighter than it had been in the past few months. She could see it now, he was trying. It wasn't perfect, and she wasn't sure where they would go from here, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. "I see it, James," she said quietly. "I see the work you've put in. I see the changes. But I can't forget everything. I can't forget the way I was treated." "I know," he said, his voice full of regret. "And I don't expect you to." They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. "I'll keep watching," Emily finally said. "And I'll keep listening. If you really have changed, then maybe we can figure out a way to move forward." James nodded, his eyes filled with hope. "Thank you. That's all I can ask for." As the night wore on, Emily found herself in a place she hadn't expected to be. She wasn't ready to forgive James, not yet. But she was willing to see if the changes were real. She wasn't sure where the future would lead, but she knew one thing: she was no longer trapped by her past. The road ahead was uncertain, and the journey would take time. But for the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by anger or hurt, a future filled with possibility, growth, and the chance for new beginnings. Weeks had passed since Emily had attended the event at Whitaker's Grill. Life had returned to a kind of routine. She continued working at the cafe, keeping a steady pace as she lived her life, focusing on herself. She was no longer the person she had been before, held hostage by the anger and betrayal of the past. She had learned that healing was a slow, often painful process, but it was a necessary one. And through it all, she had built something important: peace. Peace with herself. But now she was faced with a choice. James had continued his efforts. There had been no grand gestures, no attempts to win her back with flashy promises. Instead, it had been a steady stream of small, thoughtful actions. He had followed through on everything he said he would do. He had rebuilt his reputation with his staff, with the people around him, and even with the community. But there was one thing left: rebuilding his relationship with Emily. And that, he knew, was the hardest part. One afternoon, as Emily was closing the cafe after a busy lunch shift, her phone buzzed with a message from James. "Emily, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized something. I've spent so much time trying to fix things with Whitaker's Grill, trying to rebuild the company, that I forgot to rebuild the most important relationship of all, the one I had with you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I would like the chance to talk one more time. This time, I want it to be about us. Just us. No expectations, no pressure. Just a chance to understand where we go from here." She stared at the text, her thoughts spinning. She had moved on so much since the night of the event. She had healed. At least, she had begun to. She had felt the weight of her own power, her independence, and the ability to control her future. But the idea of sitting down with James one last time, the person who had hurt her so deeply, was still daunting. What if it brought everything rushing back? What if she opened herself up to more pain? But then, Emily thought about all the things she had learned. About the importance of forgiveness, not just for the other person, but for herself. Holding on to anger and resentment had done nothing but weigh her down, making it harder for her to move forward in life. She had forgiven herself for the mistakes she had made, and maybe it was time to extend that same grace to James. She replied, "All right, I'll meet you. But I need you to understand I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. I'm ready to move on, one way or another." James responded almost immediately, "Thank you. I'll be waiting." The next evening, Emily arrived at the restaurant. This time, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't the bustling, celebratory environment of the event from weeks ago. It was quiet, more intimate. It was just the two of them, James and Emily, sitting in a corner booth. The dim lighting created a soft, almost serene atmosphere, far removed from the tension of their past. James stood when she approached, as if he were trying to make amends before they even spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I know I don't deserve this, but I appreciate it more than you know." Emily nodded, taking a seat across from him. She wasn't sure where this conversation would lead, but she was no longer afraid of it. She had faced the worst, and she had survived. She would survive this too, whether or not they found closure tonight. James took a deep breath and leaned forward. "I've spent so much of my life focused on success, on business, on my image. And in doing that, I lost sight of the people who matter the most. I lost sight of you. The person who trusted me, worked hard for me, and who I ultimately hurt." He paused, as if waiting for her to interrupt, to yell, to walk out. But Emily simply met his gaze, her expression calm. She had heard his words, and for once, she wasn't going to let the past dictate her response. I know that I'm not entitled to your forgiveness, Emily. I want you to know that I am sorry. For what I did to you. For how I made you feel like you weren't good enough. For making you feel small. Emily took a moment to process his words. There had been a time when she would have let her anger consume her, when she would have held on to the bitterness, because it felt like the only way to protect herself. But now, she felt different. She felt stronger, not weaker. Her anger no longer defined her. James, she said softly, her voice calm but resolute, what you did to me, what you did to us, was hurtful. And I'm not going to act like it didn't matter. But I've learned that holding on to that pain only gives you power over me. And I'm not willing to give you that power anymore. James looked at her, his eyes searching hers, waiting for the words that would come next. I'm not saying that I forgive you just yet, Emily continued. But I am saying that I'm ready to let go of the anger. I'm ready to let go of the resentment. Because I don't need it anymore. It's not serving me. It's not helping me move forward. Tears welled up in James' eyes as he absorbed her words. He had never imagined that it would come to this, that Emily, the woman he had wronged so deeply, would be the one to offer him this gift of understanding. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for giving me this chance. Emily looked at him, and for the first time in their entire relationship, she felt no bitterness. There was no anger left. There was only a quiet understanding that both of them had come a long way. They were no longer the people they once were. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward from here, not as employer and employee, not as two people bound by the weight of the past, but as two individuals who had found a way to forgive and heal. I don't know what happens next, James, she said, her voice gentle. But I'm not afraid of it anymore. James nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. Neither am I. They sat together in silence for a few moments, both reflecting on how far they had come and how much farther they could go. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending that things had never happened. It was about freeing themselves from the chains of their former selves, about choosing peace over pain, and understanding that true growth came from facing the hardest parts of life head-on. And so, in that quiet corner of Whitaker's Grill, they each found a new kind of freedom. A freedom that allowed them to finally leave behind the ghosts of their past and take the first step into a future that, while uncertain, was filled with the promise of new beginnings. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?